So welcome, this is Tracy Powell for the Columbia Journalism Review, and I'm here with Davy Dave and Kelly Varela, and we're going to talk about net neutrality today and how it impacts diverse communities. Um, Not a lot of people understand what's happening in Washington, D.C. They know peripherally that people are arguing about the internet. So hopefully today, Kelly and David D can help us understand a little bit more about what neutrality is all about, what's at stake, and why we should care. As not only as journalists, but people who
Okay,
try to
well,
serve
so actually,
communities of
since
color.
yesterday, there's been some developments.
So I guess
Where
my first, I guess, to
what
just start out there, maybe Kelly and Dave can talk a little bit about themselves
so
and why they are concerned
what I
about
want
net
to talk to you
neutrality.
first about is my home.
Okay, well, I can start.
It's
And I hear some noise in the background. Is that you, Kelly?
Yeah, I think that you might be able to hear my coworker who's on the phone
Okay,
right now too, because we changed the time, so I
okay.
couldn't really.
No problem, no problem. Um,
Kelly, I'm going to put your mic on mute.
That's fine.
Okay, and then
okay,
we'll just unmute you when.
yeah, she can wave her finger when she's ready. Okay. Um, the best way that I explain net neutrality to everybody is to um, tell them how the internet has become attractive to people over the years. And most people have found it attractive, especially journalists, is because they have access to the masses without having a middleman in between, and the potential to reach the millions of people out there is right before their very eyes and fingertips. All they have to do is have something that's compelling to attract the masses. And that's been a windfall for small journalists, small businesses, people who feel like traditional media has been very limited and has excluded them. And it's been a democratizing type of situation. And what's being proposed, the best way to describe ending net neutrality would be to look at it in forms of clicks. So right now, everybody's website is one click away. So if I want to go to your website, Tracy, I click it, it's there. If I want to go to Kelly's website, I click it, she's there. But what they want to do is they want to make it so that some people are one click away, and others, depending on how much they pay, might be 4, 5, 6 clicks away. In other words, they want to slow the traffic down. And most people won't realize it if they're going to a website and they're going, oh, gee, I clicked and nothing showed up. They don't realize that that website may have been deliberately slowed down for lack of funds, or it may be several clicks away for lack of funds. And so this fundamentally changes what the internet has been about, and it kind of erases the original attractions for most people who are in the profession of providing content. It removes that, and it makes it a potentially very expensive and a backwards way of doing things, and it returns us to the days of the few and powerful having all the access and the small guy being back behind the 8 ball again.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Dave. I think another way to kind of understand it is that, and this is what we've been talking about in the media, and maybe you can help us understand if we're framing it correctly, is that some people will be on the high speed internet, and others will be in a slower lane. So
Well,
there's a fast lane and a slow lane.
that's one way of looking at it. The challenge that you have is that's already in theory happening. It doesn't really explain it in full. Yes, right now I may have a high-speed connection. I do. So it's going to be faster than yours, but that doesn't fully explain what's happening in terms of us as journalists and content providers. So specifically for the content provider, somebody who is sitting there and creating their own music, or they're doing their own blog and they want to have people out there receiving it, the way net neutrality is that everybody can access it. There's no barriers in the way. With net neutrality gone, the New York Times, for example, you'll be able to click on and get to them real quickly. To get to Davy D's blog or your blog or Kelly's blog, it may take a long time. And the user doesn't know to attribute that to net neutrality being removed. They just think that your site is janky and it isn't up to speed, so they go to places that will get them the information quick, fast, in a hurry. So for us, on the back end, the people who provide content, we got to be aware that we will be excluded without any real easily understood explanation as to why. They will just conclude that my website must be down for the day, it's always down, or I need to improve its performance, and they'll go elsewhere. And that's the danger of not having net neutrality protections in place.
Kelly, I think Dave has given us a really good understanding about how net neutrality will impact consumers and how they access the information we provide. How, as a content provider, as a media entrepreneur, how does this new rule, this proposed rule, impact you?
Yeah, well, I mean, first I think maybe I should explain a little bit about what I'm up to so that it can kind of give you some context for understanding my remarks. But, basically about 3 years ago I started out and decided that I was really going to focus on just doing media entrepreneurship. So I created a news magazine based in New York City that targets the African American community, and I worked on that for about a year and a half, and then decided to pivot over to working on an African American long form journalism magazine, which I'm working on the launch for right now. Anyway, that long form journalism magazine has a print and an online component, both of them. And I think that, when it comes down to understanding the ways that this impacts, entrepreneurs like Dave and I from, the perspective of folks who are trying to put out, content and reach our audiences, it's like, to me, it just comes down, number one, to cost. Like, that's my biggest fear, is that, all of a sudden, if I want to keep my website competitive with, and I can't even dream of making, I can't even dream about making us competitive with something like the New York Times. Like, that's just not even the realm of possibility, But let's say I wanted to compete with a smaller, African American oriented website. I don't know, maybe someone like The Root, like someone that's in that level, which they do, to maybe a million unique visitors a month or something like that. So, that's the sort of thing that really concerns me. Is like, in order for me to be able to play on a level playing field, with them, I now have to invest, additional money. To me, that feels like, it really does feel like a tax. I mean, that's kind of the way that the guy Tim Wu, the guy who coined the phrase net neutrality, he wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal a couple of days ago, in which he was talking about Tim Wu. Yeah, he was saying that basically it feels like essentially when a monopoly begins to operate, it feels like a tax on the public and a tax on the economy. And I mean, I feel like when you really look at the question of what are these internet service providers, and the question whether or not they're information or they are utilities. I mean, this, to me, it's like so clearly a utility. I have a really hard time conceiving of how anyone could see any other type of framework for what they do at this particular point.
So I heard you say a couple of different things, and here's Loris Taylor. Thanks for joining us, Loris. Loris is the founder of Native Public Media. Welcome. We've already gotten the conversation started, but right now I'm talking to we're talking about how the FCC's proposed rule change will impact content providers. So you came right in time.
Okay.
So Kelly, what I heard you say were a couple of different things. The first thing I heard you say is that you're already facing an uphill battle when it comes to being
That's
competitive.
Right. That's right.
With other publications, with other forms of media. And then the second thing I heard you say is that in order for you to even be halfway to halfway compete with these other news organizations, you're going to have to pay extra money. And again, that's something that maybe small entrepreneurs such as yourself may not have the access to that kind of capital.
Right. And I mean, we know that the economy isn't fair. So, I mean, I don't have unrealistic expectations about that, But if the question is, what impact does this have on the ways in which, the access that diverse communities have to journalism, and the ways in which, we can provide the needs to diverse people, like, clearly we know that this is going to have an impact because, I mean, one of the things that we've celebrated about the internet all this time is the fact that it has opened the door and created all these different communication channels for people of color, and we did things that we didn't have, and really really reduced the cost of publishing. And so, if we go and we add this additional cost to it, I mean, that's just completely undermining the benefit that we've gained from having the internet.
Loris, do you feel that, with public media, I mean, do you feel like you're facing some of the same challenges already, and that the proposed policies will hurt you further or hamper your efforts further?
Well, I think net neutrality has really come to heads with some of the work that Native Public Media has been doing on the ground, and it's a double whammy for us. First of all, broadband penetration in Indian country is at 10% or less. In some communities, we're slowly moving up to 15% in some, but it's a huge divide in Indian country. So if we allow Comcast and some of these larger companies to start building fast lanes for content that they prefer and to provide slow lanes for the rest of us, then that's, I believe, double jeopardy for Indian country, because we still have individuals out in Indian country that can't afford to get on the broadband highway, and this just adds an additional barrier.
Now, Loris, yesterday, Chairman Wheeler, the FCC chairman, spoke before Congress, Congressional Committee, and he said that he would not allow for companies such as Comcast to prioritize their content over others. Do you have confidence that the FCC will be able to control that?
Well, there was an interesting article in the Huffington Post where the byline belonged to a gentleman by the name of Gene Marks, who basically said, what's wrong with net neutrality? Would you sell a seat at a theater in the mezzanine the same as you would on the floor? Would you sell a hotel room in the Hamptons the same as you would the Four Seasons in Hollywood? I mean, just a visual of what the argument is. I don't have a lot of confidence right now in Chairman Wheeler's proposal. I think it's a very weak position right now in terms of protecting net neutrality for the public, and unless we have a reclassification of the internet, it's going to be a real hard-fought battle, I think.
There's something I want to add to that. I've heard that argument made before, and it's a ridiculous one on a number of levels.
Yes.
First of all, the people making the argument are the ones who came late to the party. So if we wanted to use that analogy, I've been on the internet before it was called the internet. I've been on since 91, 92. And I remember there was a time when radio stations that I worked at didn't want to go on the internet. Magazines that I was at didn't want to go on the internet. TV stations had no idea what was going on. And you had a general distrust of this form of communication. So over the years, you had millions of people who were excluded from traditional mediums that went onto the internet and found a way out of no way and created something that basically leveled the playing field. And to underscore that point, I remember being in New York in 2002, maybe 2003, and I ran into former FCC Chairman Commissioner Powell at the time. And there was a protest about one of the radio stations in New York. And I asked him about that because people were upset, and I was asking him, what do you think we can do when people have dissatisfaction with the media? And he told me point blank, he said, that's what the internet is for. You go on the internet and then you can do whatever you want and you can reach all the people. So this is the former conservative FCC chairman who basically, instead of addressing the type of media assault that many communities feel that they are under, his thing was to pass the buck and go on the internet, which says to me that he didn't really understand or appreciate its true value. So here we are 10 years later, 12 years later, we have a robust community of folks who have been excluded who now have been able to talk to their folks unimpeded, without a middle media man, none of this sort of stuff. And here come the folks that once upon a time didn't want to get on the internet. Now they want to come on and say, well, you know, we're in the mezzanine, you're in the mezzanine, and we're on the front, on the floor, and we basically want to start charging. And I say BS to that. I say this is a form of communication that's been around and is increasingly becoming a primary source for many people, and that primary source of communication shouldn't be impeded or have roadblocks in front of it because somebody decides they have more money. That to me is the fundamental principle. It should be a free and clear pathway for everybody. Now, if I want to spend extra money to get faster speed, which you can, I can get a T1 line, that's something totally different. But me as a provider or me as a community that's been marginalized, getting access to my information should not have barriers put in front of it, and that's what the ending of net neutrality does. It allows them to put obstacles to prevent somebody who doesn't even know those obstacles are there from getting to me.
I saw Gene Mark's article as well, and you know, I was just really struck by the inappropriateness of the analogy because, you know, there is a difference between a hotel room in the Hamptons and a hotel room in Queens. It's the location, but you know that analogy just really doesn't map onto the internet because of the way that networking actually occurs. And what we are actually saying to internet service providers is, do not create these different kinds of, you know, parcels of real estate that have different value and assign these different, you know, create these different classes of internet service. So that's exactly what we don't want them to do, and that doesn't exist on the internet today. So yeah, I mean, that analogy was just like so. It just made me laugh.
Another thing that has come up recently is this notion that we classify broadband as a public utility, and Kelly alluded to it, and so did Loris. And in other words, we want to treat internet service the way we treat regular landline telephone service. And I want for you guys to explain to us in just kind of plain language how that will help content providers, how that will help consumers.
Well, I can say this. I believe that much like, well, let me put it this way. Data is the new resource of the information age. We are mining data, compiling data, archiving data. I mean, we really are in the data world. Data is tied to every sector of our community, whether it's our economy, our public safety, education. All that is hopefully open to the public, and that's what we need to assure our future, our grandchildren of, that the vehicle for transporting this data is going to be there for them. So unless we do that, my big fear is that the next generation is going to be divided by those people that have access to the internet and people that don't. And when you come from communities where we've yet to realize broadband in our communities, we're just lifting that barrier up higher and higher, and we're creating a class system, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. I mean, we simply need to make sure that broadband and the internet is available to every individual, every household, much like we should have, much like utility, like water and electricity, that when we build new homes, that they're wired for the internet so everyone can have access to this resource that the world and the globe is beginning to depend on.
I'd like to add, I think the discussion around broadband penetration is where people get confused, and net neutrality. Broadband communication, meaning that everybody has access to the mechanism to use the internet, is something that, first of all, it should be a utility. It should be available to all, and it can be available to all, and it should be at top-notch speeds. As the United States, we're far behind many countries in terms of just having basic speed on our internet. And that's because you have the telecom companies want to find ways to tax that. So you already have them on the front end, on the very basic end of just being able to get on the internet, wanting to tax people. So in my house, I might have to pay $80 a month just to be on the internet, right? Somebody else, my neighbor, may pay $30 a month, and the guy down the street may be paying $100 a month to have it along with his cable. So we already have a disadvantage there. The second thing is that many of these places are privatized. So, for example, if I have a problem with Facebook, which many of us use, you know, you got close to 1 billion users, I can't pick up the phone and go, gee, something happened with my article, where is it? You know, I have to go through all these shenanigans. That needs to be regulated in itself because so many people have now become dependent upon it. So just trying to get that playing field and that aspect to make something that is used so widely and now dependent by, now is very dependent on by so many people, we have to clear the path for that. Now we're also talking about net neutrality, which is once we're on the net, can people who want to come see me actually get to me, and they want to put a barrier on that? So we have 3 different problems or challenges before us, and the telecom companies are trying to clean up on all ends. They want to clean up on the front end, they want to clean up on the back end, and then they want to have preferential treatment for their friends. So then that means that on another level they get to benefit in terms of politicians they want to support, certain content they want to prioritize, all these different types of things, and that can't happen on any of those fronts.
And I mean, I think one of the questions has been, you know, surrounding, you know, whether or not these internet service providers are actually utilities is, you know, the question whether or not there can actually be more competition encouraged, and, you know, whether this can become a very competitive field in which you have multiple internet service providers servicing, you know, cities and neighborhoods and so forth and so on. And I mean, I think that there are just some serious structural barriers to that, primarily because, as we know, the barrier to entry to setting up an internet service provider is extremely high because of the cost of digging up the ground and putting wires down. I mean, it's just very, very cost prohibitive. And so when it comes down to, you know, places like where I live, I live in East Harlem, you know, we only have one option, which is Time Warner Cable. I mean, this is New York City, and I have one option from internet service, which is Time Warner Cable. And you know, Verizon Fios has been moving into the neighborhood recently, but when I went and talked to them about the possibility of getting Verizon, they all said to me, hey, we're only signing, basically they're only signing up new construction buildings where like gentrifiers are moving in. I do not see any, you know, Verizon Fios going into, you know, the old East Harlem buildings that are in the community. When I asked them if we could get in our building, they said, sure, you can sign up your neighbors. I can sign up my neighbors. Okay. So, I mean, like that, the idea that this is like, you know, like a very competitive field, I really don't see that. I mean, this is in the past 15 years, how much competition have you really seen come into this industry? You know, like there's just no argument in my mind that this is a public utility.
Well, the thing that we should also, oh, go ahead, Laurie. Sorry, Loris.
Add on to that and say, I really don't have any confidence in these large telecom companies looking out for the public interest and welfare. And I say this because of our experience in Indian country. When it came down to providing service to tribal communities, they leaped right over our communities. They cherry-picked their customers based on a market model that didn't work for us. And so here we are, flash forward to 2014. Based on that experience, I don't believe that they're going to be looking out for our interests. And it really makes the likelihood of content discrimination a real possibility without net neutrality.
The one other thing we should also remember is that it's these very telecom companies that fought tooth and nail to prevent many cities from setting up their own network. So if you recall, there were a number of cities, at least here in the Bay Area, that's like, we'll have free wireless in our city. And it was some of those big telecom companies that came along and was like, no, we got to dead it on every which way. So where the city should actually be responsible for setting things up the way that we have wires and, you know, to use our telephones and what have you, it was these very outlets that said, nah, we don't want to do that. And it wasn't going to be a cost to them. It was going to be a cost to us as taxpayers which we paid for from Jump Street in terms of the internet. This is a taxpayer thing that now they want to try and privatize. So I never lose sight of that, and that's what I mean when I say they're Johnny-come-lately. They were the ones that probably didn't pay their full share of taxes, didn't want to get on the internet. Then when they finally get on, then they want to try and change things around and make it seem like we're the latecomers to this, when in fact we're not. And the only thing that has made it seem that way is because they have been able to convince people to let them control important entry points and privatize it, which then makes it seem like we're somehow out of pocket when they were the ones that were off the mark from day one.
I think, Dave, you're absolutely right. I know that in Louisiana, one city or one town was allowed to establish municipal broadband, and after that happened, the telecom companies came in, AT&T being one of them, and pressured the Governor Jindal, to enact to sign a law banning municipal broadband from being established in any other part of Louisiana. So you're exactly right about that. But when in the face of these type of huge challenges, what are entrepreneurs, digital entrepreneurs like Kelly and Laura and you? What are you to do? What should you be doing right now?
Well, I think. Were you going to answer that, Kelly, or should I just talk?
No, I want to listen to you. You are more experienced than me. Let me learn from you.
Well, I think one thing is that it's very important for all of us to start making some strong alliances with folks in the tech community, not the business people, but the on-the-ground type of hackers. When the Occupy Oakland was here, they set up their own internet right there. There were people that knew how to wire this up and do all type of mesh things and get things up and running. And that sort of innovativeness, which I think is a hallmark for people who usually have to do it out because it's called being resourceful, we're going to have to kind of make that more of a purposeful type of relationship for ourselves as well as for our community, because all of us have this in common. We're all going to be X'd out. When you have people lobbying the governor to make it a law so that you can't set up your own broadband, or the city can't, or can't be public, that's a problem to me. That's the first step to where we are now. Now we're at net neutrality. Let's privatize that and get rid of certain content providers. So I think we need to really make those alliances with creative and tech-savvy type of individuals, whether it's Girls Code or any of these other groups that are around, and come up with ways in which we can start to service ourselves. And we're going to have to be more active in making sure that our elected officials, who many times are bought and paid for by some of these telecom companies, to make sure that they know there will be a punitive aspect if they go with the telecoms versus the people. Those are some challenges I see in front of us right now.
I also see, a possibility perhaps for people to, kind of do more collaboration and perhaps consolidation of the things that we're working on. In the past, there wasn't necessarily, obviously there's a huge benefit to working with people, and I don't want to make it seem that way. But for a lot of us that are, producing content, or we're content providers who aren't necessarily very market-oriented, we're not doing this because we are looking to make a big profit out of it or whatever. There's a lot of really great content providers and bloggers that we know about that we're friends with who fall into that category. But, nowadays, like, if we just want people to visit those sites, we may find ourselves in a situation where it makes more sense for us to just combine our traffic together and just essentially work in some sort of network type of basis. I don't know. It's difficult to produce that type of collaboration and for us to work together, but it's something that we've always talked about needing to do. And I don't know. Maybe this is just that incentive that we need to really sit down and start working on that.
I would add that the FC, the Federal Communications Commission, has a rulemaking in progress in that we have 120 days to flood that office with our comments, and that's really how the rules are being made. Unless we get the mass of people in the U.S. to respond to this rulemaking. The FCC will argue that they are limited by the decision of the court, and they really need to hear from the public. I think that's the stand we need to make, and we just don't have that much time. I'm going to be encouraging tribal leaders in Alaska in a short while to be responding to these new rules as they are handed down. I'm going to be asking that tribes weigh in on making sure that we reclassify the internet as a utility. It's a long shot, but it's definitely worth the try. So 102 days is not very long.
And I think that's a good role that like our media activists can play, in terms of like organizing people and setting up campaigns to educate people about like, what this practically means. Because, obviously one of the biggest questions before the FCC right now, based on what the chairman wrote in his opinion on the subject, is the question whether or not there's going to be the, what's it called, the paid promotion.
Pay for play.
Paid priority.
Paid prioritization. I think when you really put it in those like very stark terms for people, I just feel like someone just needs to really sit down and organize, get us really organized in terms of like how we're communicating about this stuff and kind of raise the public awareness. But you're right. I mean, I've read that there have been like 22,000 comments made already. So people are on it.
People are definitely on it. I think in our community and many of the communities of color, what's confusing the issue is that we have prominent people of color who have been beholden to the telecommunications industry, and they have either been silent or they run this whole game about diversity, and then you're like, well, you said the word diversity. What does that have to do with making sure that net neutrality protections are in place? And then by the time they're done, you're like, okay, well, this civil rights leader or this community leader seems to say this is going to be a bad thing. And so to me, I made it a point to point them out, call them out, and ask them point blank, what's happening? A good person is Jesse Jackson. He was down here in Silicon Valley all last week. And I know him personally, so I'm like, what's your stance on this? What is your stance? He refused to answer, which is not a good sign because you're sitting down there interfacing with the companies. And by the way, we should know most of the companies in Silicon Valley want to keep net neutrality protections in place. But as a civil rights leader, what are you telling people when you're holding your press conferences about this very important thing? And he didn't say anything. Then finally he hits me today and he's like, well, we're in conversation. What does that mean? It shouldn't be any conversation. Keep the playing field free and clear for everybody. And somebody like me, I'm not going to be afraid to say that no matter who they are, because that is going to have a direct impact and an indirect impact for our people, our movements, the things that are important. All these types of crises that we're facing are often not reflected in the media. Heck, they're not even talking about net neutrality in Silicon Valley's home. I'm in the Bay Area. We haven't heard one news story on any of the main stations that have tech reporters talking about net neutrality. So that should tell you what is at stake here. That means that there are people that are looking and saying, if I can get rid of Kelly, if I can get rid of Davey, if I can get rid of Lori and their content, then we become the only game in town and we can monopolize that, make money and call it a day, and it ain't going to happen on my watch. I'm determined not to have that go down without a fight.
I'm glad that you all brought that up because not only have certain groups been silent on this, journalists have been silent on this issue. Just on last Friday, the Pew report came out about television news stations not reporting on this issue, broadcast or cable stations not really reporting on this issue. People have actually had to, if they wanted to find out about net neutrality, they've had to go online or on Twitter and search out the information on their own. Journalists aren't talking about this. So I want to discuss that a little bit. Is part of the reason journalists have been so quiet on this because it's not a very sexy issue? Is part of it because they don't understand it themselves? What do you think the main issue is, and and how do people go? How can journalists? Yeah, because
would you like to become busy?
we're not supposed to. We're not
Generator with
advocates.
this,
We are observers. So how do we talk about
I
this
know
issue? How
Sony
do we learn about this
acquired
issue?
the ship.
What exactly are the challenges for
I
journalists?
think the challenges is the term net neutrality itself.
I don't know
Uh,
exactly.
a lot of people just don't understand what it is. It's a term that really, when people hear it, their eyes gloss over. It's just hard to understand. The other thing is that they brought up a really good issue. We
My guess is
have
maybe
some really prominent
they probably should.
civil rights individuals out across the country who are making a stance against net neutrality. And it's confusing to people of color across the country because these are individuals that we look up to look out for our rights, to look out for our interests. And when they take a stand against net neutrality and publicly sign on, it's a huge message. Then people say, I've heard actually some of our constituents say, well, it must not really be bad after all. I mean, you know, what's the big deal? You know, for companies to make more money, and that's one of the issues. The other is that we do have media folks who themselves are not tied into the net neutrality conversation. It's sort of like telecom. You know, talk about telecommunications. There's just a few of us who really are like policy wonks who love this kind of stuff. But the general public, you really need to have a face-to-face, I think, conversation with them to get them on board. And that's not what's happening out there.
I think that many people can understand this complex issue. It's, as a journalist, it's my job to break it down and make it understandable. We make all sorts of complex topics understandable to people. We report what's going on with the Dow Jones and what's going on with the stock market. That's no more confusing than net neutrality, and people look for that sort of information. But the truth of the matter is that the telecom companies were very smart to buy off people, and they did it in two ways. One, they were longtime sponsors of many of their events and conventions and what have you. So there was a relationship there. And then the second thing is that they pretty much did a whisper campaign, and this is something that we used to do in radio, which is like, hey, you'll be the only person in town. You'll be the kingmaker or queenmaker in your community. So they have an incentive not to say anything, because all of a sudden, if I'm a potential leader, if Lori is a potential leader, or Kelly is a potential leader, or you, Tracy, that means that if there's a fast and slow lane, we're eliminated from that, and then all of a sudden we have to go through these hand-picked folks to champion our issues, and we're not always going to be on the same page on important things, especially if it needs to be challenged. And so I don't want a middleman. We should never have to have a middleman or woman to communicate our desires and our needs and our issues to the public at large. This is what the internet has allowed us to do, eliminate the middleman, and they want to start putting those back up there. And I don't care who they are, you can't be the middleman for my issues anymore. That's the most important thing. We all got to earn our audience with our talent, our understanding of the issues, and the trust that we've established with the community. Not have somebody be handpicked and then we have to go through them. And that's pretty much what they're trying to set up, a bunch of fiefdoms.
Kelly, you're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. I mean, I also think that, you know, we can't just assume that journalists are immune to apathy. You know, the type of political apathy that affects the average everyday citizen who's not a journalist also can affect journalists as well. So I definitely agree with everything that everyone else is saying, but we also know that, like, this is an issue that, you know, people who are media providers and really care about, you know, communication in a society and the role that it plays in the political process, like, this is an issue that a very small select group of people actually is very, very passionate about, and that's really unfortunate because it has such a huge impact on us all as a society. And you know, it's just something that you can't help but feeling like, oh my God, if we don't get this message out there, if we don't get people to understand like how important this is, this could just be catastrophic. And so I'm hoping that we can kind of work against the tide. You know, this is sort of like the natural direction that it's going in right now to help people understand and wake up and realize like this is a very important issue.
Kelly, the National
Mhm.
Association of Black Journalists recently signed on to a letter to President Obama about net neutrality. They want to preserve the open internet. So
Mhm.
NABJ did come out. Loris, I don't know if the Native American Journalists Association has done anything, but is there anything that you as content providers,
Right.
digital entrepreneurs can do in terms of talking to to journalism associations and making them aware of the challenges you face as content providers
Right.
and what they need to be doing in terms of educating their membership and speaking on this issue? And I guess Loris can answer it first, and then we'll come back to Kelly.
Well, Native Public Media has been really involved since net neutrality became a huge issue a few years ago. We filed the numerous comments before the FCC. We've taken the issue to the National Congress of American Indians, which we will again do when we have our mid-year conference in Alaska next month. But I think where we're having a battle is we have tribal telecom companies. There's about 12 of them that serve Indian country, and they've been really lobbied hard by these telecom companies who are urging them to take a stance against net neutrality. So there's a lot of work ahead of us. We'll be meeting with the Native American Journalists Association, also at the National Native Media Conference. Certainly net neutrality is on our agenda. But even before then, we've connected with Free Press and other allies around the country to try to get the message out to people. And so really trying to have the movement move forward. We've posted on Facebook, tweeted about it, and we'll continue to do that. But I just feel like we're running out of days to make this really a focus for the country. And the bottom line is that really our democracy is at stake. I mean, whose democracy is it going to be when we have content that may not even see the light of day on this vehicle that now governs our lives? So it's really a huge issue.
Kelly and Dave, have you all talked with any of the journalism associations and communicated why this issue is so important, particularly to journalists of color and media entrepreneurs?
Most of the journalists in my circle are pretty much aware of it. I've sat down and talked with them, and there have been others that talk with me about it. And so really our biggest challenge, at least here, is to get it to the masses and cut through a lot of the things that are distractions. How do we make this relevant to them? So when I talk to artists, I have to couch the story in a way that makes them understand, hey, look, you're an independent artist in the Bay Area. You're able to be heard around the country. That's going to stop, and it's going to favor these major labels. Now they get it. Now they want to. Now the question is, where do I direct them to? And getting somebody to call their congressperson when they feel like that congressperson is not going to listen, or getting them to trust in government again. When many of them remember when President Obama sat right here in the Bay Area and said, "I will protect net neutrality." I get a lot of people going, "I thought that was a done deal. I thought it was being protected." So you got to explain that somehow he appointed somebody who wasn't going to follow through. When there have been meetings here, there have been overflow crowds. There's been hundreds of people to come out to learn about net neutrality. Center for Media Justice and other organizations out here have done a tremendous job in outreaching and educating folks. It's now getting to these proverbial gatekeepers to the masses who have either celebrity status or they've established a trust because they've been right or they've been on the good side of major issues. So if I use the NAACP is against police brutality and stop and frisk. They've been the ones to organize on that. But they've also been silenced on net neutrality. So that confuses people, and that's where it's really, you have to take a firm stance and be like, look, This is just as important, and you're going to have to do that without their voice or blessings, so to speak. But I think most journalists know now it's really a question of, can they scale it up and reach this larger audience that, as Laura's explained, desperately needs to have that. And I don't know how we can do that other than just go door by door, inch by inch, and make this a conversation at every turn, because I just can't count on the mainstream to put this issue out there, and there are reasons why they won't do it.
I keep talking on mute. I also feel like the vast majority of people in my circle, there's a lot of conversation about net neutrality. I see, in my social media feeds, everyone's talking about it, everyone's sharing articles about it, everyone's sharing, we're discussing it. But just like David D said, it's about getting that message out to the masses. That is the number one issue right there. Is that, if I sit down next to somebody on the train, when we start talking about this, I'm not necessarily sure that they're going to understand what's at stake and what's happening here. And that's the level that it needs to be at,
Well, guys, I think this has really been a really, really good conversation. I think it's the start of maybe more that we'll have in the coming days. I think we have about 4 months before the FCC is scheduled to revisit this topic again. So I just want to, for now, I want to thank you for joining me today and say that we will talk again. Thanks everybody else who stopped in and who will be watching this recording later. I'm Tracy Powell. I write about media and media policy issues for the Columbia Journalism Review. I'm here with Davey D. You can read some of his stuff about this issue, this really important issue, at hiphopandpolitics.com. Kelly Varilla, who founded Communion of New York and soon to be the Urban Thinker, and Loris Taylor, who is the founder of Native Public Media. Thank you guys so much for joining me.
Yep.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Loris, and have a good day, baby.
Good to see you again, Kelly. Take care, Loris.
Thanks, Tracy.
Peace out, y'all.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.